All those ashes at St. Graves Pass, buried in coffee cans and thick liquor bottle glass, where the highway turns till it gets lost, and then you come across a ragtag group of crosses. A railroad town in northern Arizona, a rodeo dress from a thrift store going under, Santa Fe line, you can't take me back to that northeast city in its winter's gray and black. We've come so near to being pioneers, even if what that was never becomes clear. Turquoise rings and copper arms, white lightning in my pockets, and silver good luck charms. We followed those fast clouds all the way to Bisbee and settled in for the greatest night in history. We've come so near to being pioneers, even if what that was never becomes clear. We've come so near to being pioneers, even if what that was never becomes clear.
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute, so let me try again. So I was trying to start off by saying some traditional greetings from Arizona. Now, Dobry Večer, that is, of course, in Russian. Welcome, good evening. And I am Eduardo Pagan, and I am coming to you from the state of Arizona. And so I'm with the American Moscow Center. I'm sharing with you on behalf of the American Center in Moscow. Let me also say welcome to you in a couple different languages, which are very common here in Arizona. In Spanish, buenas tardes desde Arizona. and also in my own native language, my own Yaqui language. Um, Lyos and Chanyavu, which translates as "May Creator have mercy upon you and pity upon you" as well. So, let me go ahead and get started with the slides, and just share with you a little bit about the state. So, a little bit about me. As I'd mentioned before, my name is Eduardo Pagan. I'm the Bob Stump Endowed Professor of History at Arizona State University. Born and raised in Arizona, and have very, very deep roots in this state. On my mother's side, we are descendants of Yaqui people. And, I'd like to believe that my ancestry in this state goes back many, many, many generations. Um, I want to make very clear I'm not a enrolled member of the tribal community, although I very much honor my ancestry, my heritage, and my grandparents as well, in acknowledging my ancestry. Just a little bit about the Yaqui community in Arizona. They're most famous for what is known as the deer dancer that you have pictured here, and Dear Brother is a very important part of Yaqui belief systems. And so at many gatherings, the presence of Dear Brother is welcomed there through the dance as well. So if you know anything about the Yaqui people, you will often see this image here of the deer dancer. And I just want to just mention very quickly that the deer dancer is a very important part of Yaqui ceremonies, and it ties back to the sacred narratives about why we're here and why we exist, and all those great questions as well. Here's what I'd like to do today. So I want to just locate where Arizona is, if you're not familiar with it. And I want to talk a little bit about the distinctive geography of Arizona. It's a very unique state with different elevations and different landscapes as well. I want to give you just a very quick history about ancient Arizona. In other words, the ancient people that came to the American Southwest. Best scientific guesses are somewhere around 11,000 BCE, before the Common Era, up until about 1540. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Spanish conquest, just a little bit, the Spanish colonization of the American West, and in particular Arizona. And then in 1846 to 1848 was U.S. war with Mexico. And this is how where I am living now, which was once part of Spanish colonies, New Spain, and for a brief moment it became the Mexican Republic when Mexico broke away from Spain. The United States came in, made war with Mexico, and then acquired this territory, which is partly why I'm speaking to you in English today. And then from that, once the United States acquires Arizona and all of the rest of what is characterized as the American West, cowboys, we'll talk a little bit about the industries that made Arizona into the state that it is, and the populations as well. There are a number of different people that came into Arizona and live here today. And I want to come back to very quickly about the distinctive landscape, because that's one of our most popular features. Are the different landscapes, the mountains, the valleys, the views, the sunsets, which are very spectacular as well. Then I'll mention very quickly a bit about the wildlife in Arizona. Some of it's rather unique. And then I'll talk a little bit about the cultural features of Arizona. If you were to come to Arizona today, what would you find? So that's what I want to end up on. If we have time as well, I think I'd like to share with you a little bit about kind of current political issues, the things that shape the discussions in the state and what people are concerned about. So very quickly, where is Arizona? This is a picture of the 48 states in the continental United States. And of course, in red, that is Arizona. So we border with Mexico. So we're just north of Mexico, the state of Sonora. We're bordering also with California and New Mexico, and on the other side to the east of us and above us is the state of Utah. That will become important in just a little bit when I talk about the peopling of Arizona. Now, you may be familiar with Arizona. Westerns have been very, very popular in American culture, starting with the earliest days of American cinematography. The earliest movies that were made, Westerns, were very, very popular. And many of the Westerns were shot in Arizona. This is a picture of Stagecoach, 1939, if I remember correctly. And this is a scene, and this was a location in Arizona. So you'll see Arizona a lot if you watch any of the American Westerns. You know, most people think about Arizona as kind of cowboys and Indians fighting with one another. And I just want to put this up there and just say, of course, Arizona history is far more nuanced. There are far more complexities. Yes, there were conflicts between American Indians and the American military, sometimes with settlers as well. But of course, the history and the culture is much bigger than that. But this is what you often see in American media, particularly movies or some of the old television shows. So let me tell you a little bit about the distinctive geography of Arizona. So what you see here, again, is a map of the 48 states, the continental United States, and the large oval circle is just trying to capture what is known as the Rocky Mountains, which reach all the way up into Canada to the north, all the way down into Mexico, down to the south. And then the circle, the round part right there, which is kind of in a gold color, that's known as the Colorado Plateau. I'll mention a little bit more about that in just a moment. But I want to put this into context in terms of where Arizona is. We're part of the tail end of the Rocky Mountains, and that becomes very important in some of the distinctive features that I will share with you in just a moment, and also the Colorado Plateau. All right, so with that, let me share with you also the kind of the three zones when you think of the state of Arizona. So up to the right, the circle that you have there, this is the Arizona portion of the Colorado Plateau. The Colorado Plateau is an ancient seabed that rose in the Triassic period, if I remember correctly. This is millions of years ago. And at one time it was underwater. It was compressed sediment that, through geographic uplift, the different plates that are smashing with each other, made this area rise up in elevation. And so that creates this distinctive high desert landscape that you see over there by the round circle. And then we come down just a little bit and you see that long oval. This is really kind of our mountain country. And what's very interesting about this, and it's largely because of this Colorado Plateau, because remember, we're bordering with Mexico, and just south of us is the Sea of Cortez. So the Sea of Cortez comes up, and all that moisture and all that humidity is blown up into the state. But as the air hits the Colorado Plateau, which is probably 1,000 feet above sea level, the air is forced up, and as air goes up, it condenses, and then you have lots of rain. And so that creates this kind of forest area that you see here to the right next to the that oval shape. And then you come down to the other circular shape, and this is right here. And this is really the kind of area that I live in. It's the Sonoran Desert. And I just want to say, I'll show you some pictures of the Sonoran Desert in just a moment. I just want to say this about the Sonoran Desert. You hear the word desert, and I just want to point out there are all kinds of different deserts. There's the Saharan Desert, which I'm sure you've seen, which is just all sand dunes, right? Blowing sand all the time. There's the Chihuahuan Desert. There's the Mojave Desert. And then the Sonoran Desert is really a green desert relative to other deserts. And I'll show you some more pictures about the plants that grow in the Sonoran Desert, but it's relatively green. All right, let's talk very quickly about ancient Arizona. And Arizona began to be peopled, as from our best guess as historians and anthropologists, began to be peopled somewhere around 11,000 before Common Era, sometime around there. And again, our best understanding is that people came from Siberia, often in search of game, following game, went through what is now Alaska and into Canada, and continued down into now the American West, but of course the other parts of the Americas, North America, Central America, all the way down into South America. You'll notice this very interesting indicator over to the right, right by the number of somewhere around 23,000 from France, from Europe. and it's going into the United States. And that's simply a map that acknowledges that, there are lots of discussions about where did the American Indians come from. Most of them likely came from from Siberia and through different migrations, periods of migrations, often in search of game. But there seems to be evidence that people from the other part of the world, from Europe, perhaps Egypt as well, perhaps even Northern Europe, made their way into the Americas. We know that the Vikings early discovered the kind of the Canada area, the northeastern part of the American United States. Some of them may have left an impact. They may have joined with the local native population as well. And I'll just say one other thing about this as well. What's interesting about this kind of possible French connection, again, we don't know. There's a distinctive form of technology in the way that spear points were made out of stones and arrowheads that were made out of stones as well. This is known as the Soltrean hypothesis. There's a very distinctive way in which these projectile points were made. And they're known as the Clovis point. Now, that's getting a little bit into the weeds, and I apologize, but it's just a very distinctive way in which arrowheads are made and spearheads. And they're found in a particular area in New Mexico, which is right next to Arizona. The only other part of the globe where this particular technology is found is actually in France. Now, is that coincidence or is that evidence of some kind of cross-continental communication? We don't know. It's open to speculation. But I just simply want to acknowledge that rather than a monogenesis, a singular origin of the American Indians people, there may be a polygenesis. So in other words, they came from a variety of different peoples. Time will tell. All right, now let's go on to talk a little bit about the ancient inhabitants of Arizona. As far as we know, there were 3 or 4 very distinct cultures in what is now Arizona. To the very north of Arizona, these are the Anasazi. The Anasazi lived in the mountain areas. They lived in cliffs. I'll show you some images in just a moment. There's the Mogollon people that you'll see in green that stretched all the way down into Mexico. And also then the smallest area right there, kind of ovular shape. These are the Hohokam people, as they're known. And they lived in the Phoenix area, kind of in the Sonoran Desert in the central area of Phoenix. I'll show you pictures of all of these areas in just a moment. What's interesting about these communities, though, is that they lasted somewhere, again, between 11,000 BCE all the way up until about 1250 CE or AD, as it might know. So in other words, 1250 AD. And then after that point, these distinctive communities broke apart. Sometimes they're referred to as disappearing. That's a bit romantic. I don't want to suggest that somehow they just went away and became lost. They didn't become lost. But the cultures, the units, the organizational units of religion and politics and culture that kept them together as a people broke apart. And those different people, the Anasazi, the Hohokam, the Mogollon people as well, they broke up into what is now the modern American Indian tribes that you find in the American West and that you find in Arizona as well. Now, I do want to say something very interesting about 1250 AD or CE. Now, what was unique about that time? Why did these communities and cultures that existed for a long time, why did they suddenly break apart into smaller units? Well, we do know that the rest of the world was experiencing a climatological shift. But rather than global warming, it was global cooling. And this was the beginning of what was known as the Little Ice Age. And the Little Ice Age also had an impact in Europe. This is known as the beginning of what Europeans and Americans refer to as the Dark Ages, when European culture was also thrown into disarray. And they had to make some creative adaptations as rain patterns changed, weather patterns changed, which had an impact on crops, their ability to feed themselves. And when that happens, political organizations usually break apart and they reformulate into something else. Religions also do the same thing. And so what happened in Arizona also seemed to have been happening around the world. that caused this kind of reconfiguration of the ancient people of Arizona. Now, these are some of the modern tribes when the Americans first came into the Arizona area. These were the modern tribes that people would find. Of course, the Hopi, the Zuni, the Navajo, the Apache, and so on, right? So these are the smaller units that these older cultures and civilizations broke down into. And it was largely the result of climate change. I will share with you this one story, though, as I'm thinking about this, and I always find this interesting, is when you listen to some of the uh, the mythology, the belief system, the folklore of native people about what happened to the ancient ones. Often, what you'll hear is this belief that they became so skilled at being able to control the weather, call down rain when they needed to, for example, that the weather rebelled. And from a native sensibility, the weather is controlled by deities, and the crops are controlled by deities as well. And these deities began to resent how powerful humans had become, and because of that, decided to punish humankind by withholding rain and by changing the weather patterns and by preventing crops from growing, right? So, from a native sensibility, this is how they made sense about what was happening and why the climate was changing. All right, with that, let's go on now. Let's talk about very quickly. I just want to show you how Arizona Native Americans live, the different kinds of ways. And the only reason why, as I've thought about this, is again, if you're familiar with the imagery of Arizona, and you will often see them in the movies in American popular culture, movies and television, you'll think about teepees, which American Indian communities did live in teepees, but they were farther to the east than Arizona. Those communities that utilized teepees tended to be in kind of the plains area, the central area of the 48 states of the United States. They lived in teepees. In Arizona, they lived in very different kinds of settings, and it really depended upon their economic, cultural, and social activities. This is a picture of Apaches. As a matter of fact, Geronimo is one of the most famous Apaches, and you'll see him pictured to the far right. The Apaches were raiders and traders. So they were hunters, they were gatherers, they would raid crops from other communities, they would raid goods as well, and then they would trade also. And because they had to be highly mobile, their dwellings tended to be teepee-like. If you notice the poles at the very top, they were teepee-like, but they could be constructed out of the material that they could find in the wilderness. And so you'll see here a frame, and on top of the frame, grass. So the grass provided insulation. The grass provided a fair degree of weatherproofing as well, kept you much drier, much warmer as well. And so for those communities that were raiders and traders and hunters that were highly mobile, following game and following raiding routes and things of that nature, their dwelling units tended to be much more temporary, if you will. So other communities that were more sedentary, they stayed in place. They weren't raiders so much. They didn't travel so much. They stayed in place because they had flocks, or they grew foodstuffs, crops, and things of that nature. And this is a picture of Navajos, and of course they are sheep herders, and so their dwelling units tend to be more stable, more permanent. This is what is known as a hogan right here. It is also constructed with a wooden framework, but then it's covered with dirt as a way of insulating the home, and it keeps it cool in the summer and warm in the winter. And there's a fair degree of protection from the elements also. Um, as I'd mentioned before, there were also many American Indian communities that grew crops, and they stayed in place, and they lived along the riverways in Arizona. And their dwelling units tended to be, again, much more stable. These were not people that were moving all the time. And so this is a picture of what is known as a cliff dwelling. So you'll see inside this cliff, you'll see units or these dwellings that they look like apartment buildings, really multi-storied, and the people tended to live in these cliff dwellings, and their growing fields would be down in the canyon bottom where the river was, and then they would live up in these canyon dwellings as a way of keeping themselves safe from the raiders who would come by and try and take their things, right? Now I'll show you one other picture as well. Some of these more stable communities had freestanding homes that look a lot like modern homes to this day. The ladders, of course, were allowed them to get up to the roof and to the upper levels as well. But these are freestanding units that were made out of wooden structures, wooden beams, and then covered with mud, again, to provide insulation in the summer and into winter, but also protection from the elements. So there are two other things I want to say about the American Indian communities before the Americans or the Spanish came here, then the Americans as well. Two other things. This is really important. These lines that you see here in what is the American West, these are estimated trade networks. And the idea that I want to get across with this particular slide is that all Native communities living in the American or the Western Hemisphere, North and South, Central, it doesn't matter, they were connected by trade networks. They didn't live in isolation. And so they traded technologies, they traded goods, they traded crops, they traded clothing, leather goods of that nature as well. And they also traded news. And so when you had European colonists coming far from the East, the English, the French, many American Indians in the West who had never actually seen a European knew about them. And they knew about them because the news traveled along the trade networks. And so that's the square is kind of the Arizona area that I'm talking about. But I want you to understand that people living in Arizona, the American Indian communities, were very connected to tribal communities on the coast. And so they would trade for seashells, or they were connected to tribal communities far down below Mexico into Central America. They would trade for the feathers of exotic birds, and the list goes on and on, right? And so it was a very active scenario when you think about what American Indian life was like before the coming of the Europeans. They were very involved with each other and traded information and technologies and skills and all kinds of things like that. Now, here's the last piece I want to share with you as we're talking about American Indians. This is something you can see to this day. This is known as a petroglyph. And petroglyphs, all humans do this, no matter where you go in the globe. Human beings seem to have this inner drive to kind of carve out that I was here, or carve out something of significance in stone. And these are native petroglyphs. And here's what I want to share with you as well, is that many American Indian communities were mobile people. So in places that are hot like Arizona, they would move when the wintertime would come. And if they were living up in the mountains where it would snow, they would move down into the warmer elements and warmer areas of Arizona where it didn't snow and the weather was much nicer. And then when it got hot and those lower elevations, they would move up to the cooler climates in northern Arizona. And this is where petroglyphs become very interesting. Petroglyphs often signaled what kind of game could be found in a particular area. And these petroglyphs served as markers, as roadmaps, if you will, for people who traveled. They could look at petroglyphs and they could see whether water was close by, how much water was there. They could see what kind of game existed as well. Now, petroglyphs were also used for ceremonial purposes, and you'll see a lot of ceremonial figures on petroglyphs. And in the modern period, and in today, you can find petroglyphs all over Arizona. Some of them are protected by the government, and some of them are just out there, but you can find them everywhere. It's just amazing. If you go out hiking in the countryside, you can find petroglyphs all over. So let's move forward then to Spanish colonization, the Spanish explorers. In 1540, Francisco Coronado put together a large exploratory group of Spanish and natives from Mexico to head north from Mexico City up into this terra incognita, this land that was unknown, which is the American West. And the reason why they set out in 1540 is they wanted to find the rumored cities of Cibola. So among many American Indian communities, there were stories of these civilizations that had fantastic dwellings and had great wealth. And these stories reached the ears of the Spanish settlers in Mexico. Now, these stories probably came from ancient legends of the people that lived in the Americas before the Spanish came here. The ancient ones I was talking about, the Hohokam and the Mogollon and the Anasazi, who had very impressive pottery and building structures and so on. So these stories that continue to be told probably referred back to those ancient dwellers. But nonetheless, part of the stories that the Spanish heard was there's fantastic wealth and there were large civilizations to be conquered as well. And so they set off from Mexico City and headed north. And so from 1540 to 1542, they wandered all through the American West, including parts of Arizona, in search of Cibola. They never found it, and they went home in 1542. But nonetheless, this is the beginning of Spanish colonization in what is now characterized as Arizona and the American West. And this is another petroglyph I want to share with you, which is rather interesting. You remember, as I mentioned before, that petroglyphs served as a way of conveying information about a particular area. If you'll notice these petroglyphs, these are clearly people on horseback, Spanish. You'll notice that they're carrying lances. You'll notice that the central figure has a cloak with a cross on it, like the Crusades that Europeans engaged in the Middle Ages as well. And you'll also notice the hats and the helmets that the Spanish wore. So this is an actual petroglyph that's recording some of the earliest sightings that native people had of the Spanish explorers as they came into this area. And again, I just find this very, very interesting just to note this moment. And imagine what it was like if you had been living in an area forever, and suddenly these strange people came and they're wearing armor and they have armaments that you've never seen before. They have animals that you've never seen before. You can imagine that this was an awe-inspiring sight and that people would want to record it, partly as a warning, but partly as a record as well. Now, the red part, again, this is a picture of the United States. The red part illustrates the areas that the Spanish Empire claimed for themselves when they arrived in Mexico, down at the bottom of the screen. They claimed all of what is now considered the American West, well up into the Midwest of what is now the United States. So at one time, the Spanish Empire claimed all of that. But I do want to note this: they never controlled it. And they never controlled it because there were so many American Indian tribal communities that were very organized, and they were skilled warriors, and they did not appreciate outsiders coming into their land. So the Spanish, even though they tried to colonize different parts of California, Arizona, New Mexico, they could only make it up so far, but they couldn't control the land. They could only establish certain outposts and certain settlements. And they couldn't control the land because American Indians, again, were very skilled defenders of their territory. So in 1846, the United States declares war on Mexico on a pretense that Mexico had somehow invaded what was then the United States. Of course, it's not factually true, but many countries have never let facts get in the way of their imperial designs. And so the United States attacked Mexico and for 2 years fought against the Republic of Mexico. Now, Mexico had broken away from Spain at this point and declared themselves a republic. And they were an independent nation only for about 20 years before the United States attacked it. Mexico lost. And as part of the settlement of, between these two nations, again, the United States attacked, Mexico was simply trying to defend itself. Part of the settlement was the United States gained what is now the American West. And so you'll see in green what was once New Spain. This was all of what Spain had claimed for themselves. And then after the war, you'll see the new American areas or states: Texas to the right, New Mexico, and then Arizona, where I'm at, and then California over to the left. We will go through the rest of the states as well. But the United States, after that war, acquired about a third of the land claims of the Republic of Mexico. And so this is how Americans then began to come into what used to be Mexican territory. And the one thing I want to say about this map shows you um, some of the earliest colonization of Arizona by American settlers or immigrants from Europe. And the largest group of settlers that were successful in colonizing Arizona was a religious community called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They're more commonly known as Mormons. And the Mormons had left what was then the United States because of religious persecution, and they aimed to set up in Mexican territory. But as they were traveling across, of course, the United States attacks Mexico. And after 1846, where the Mormons had headed up in Utah was now American territory. But nonetheless, Mormon settlers came down from Utah and began to settle in all kinds of areas in what is now Arizona. So they were largely successful in settling many parts of Arizona. Now, let me just mention very quickly. So Americans start to come into Arizona from 1846 forward, and there are a number of industries that really define what made Arizona Arizona. A lot of people think about cattle. Again, if you go back to the movies, it's all about horses and cattle and fighting off Indians and all of that. Not quite. The most productive industry in Arizona was actually mining. Mining. They were mining for gold, they were mining for silver, and they were mining for copper. So that was the largest industry that employed the most people in what was then the territory of Arizona, which then became a state in 1912. But this mining pulled in lots of workers from all over the globe. So you had miners coming from Europe, you had miners coming up from Mexico to work in the mines. And often the American entrepreneurs, the mine owners, went to parts of Europe where mining was well established and recruited miners to come to Arizona to work there. And they also went to parts of Mexico where mining was well established by the Spanish since the 1530s. And so coming into Arizona were lots of different populations. That's the point they wanted to get across. First of all, that mining was the most important economic activity in Arizona. And secondly, mining brought all kinds of people into Arizona, immigrants from Europe, people from Mexico as well. This is just a picture again. I just want to show you. These are miners that gathered together outside a mine. And if we could go and talk to them, you would find out that they were from all different parts of the globe. Now, also an important part was that Mexicans, as I'd mentioned before, were recruited into Arizona. And so even though Arizona was at one time part of Mexico, and there were lots of Spanish speakers living in Arizona, there was still an effort to recruit more workers into Arizona. And so a lot of industry depended on Mexican workers in the 19th century, and they still depend upon Mexican workers in the 21st century. I'll get to that at the end of the presentation as we talk about kind of modern politics. Now, this is a picture of cattle ranching. And as I said before, if you're familiar with American popular culture when it comes to the American West, this is what you'll see. You'll see men on horseback, cowboys wearing cowboy hats, herding cattle. And cattle was an important part of the American economy, but it certainly wasn't the dominant part. But the reason why I'm showing this to you is that there have been studies. Again, if you look at the American media, the American movies, all you see are Americans as cowboys. And as a matter of fact, most cowboys were either European immigrants, people from France, people from England, from Belgium, Germany, but a third of them, about 1 out of every 3, were actually African Americans who fled from slavery in the American South, and they came out west and found employment as cowboys. And that's something that American media has yet to adequately represent in television shows or movies about the American West, is that 1 out of every 3 American cowboy was actually an African American cowboy. Now, some of the other things that contributed to the Arizona economy was citrus, oranges, lemons. And one of the interesting things about citrus is that oranges were introduced into Arizona by the Spanish colonists. So oranges from Spain, Valencia oranges, for example, were introduced into Arizona. Where did the Spanish get oranges? Some of you might know this. Oranges originate in the Middle East. And so as Europe engaged in crusades and invaded parts of the Middle East, they picked up technologies. So their castle building improved, but they also picked up local food products. And so oranges was one of them that at least for Spain, that the Spanish crusaders brought back with them and then introduced into the Spanish peninsula. And then when Spain set out to colonize the American West or the Americas, they brought with them oranges. But a lot of people don't know that oranges actually have this long background into the Middle East. That's where they originated. The other thing I want to point out are dates. Dates, which grow off of palm trees right here, also originated in the Middle East, but were also introduced by Spanish colonists because of this long, very interesting history of invasions and learning about other peoples and other technologies and other foods, and then introducing that knowledge into the areas that they colonized. And so, again, Mexican workers were very, very necessary part of the Arizona economy in picking fruits and dates and all kinds of things and in growing orchards. Very, very important. Here's the last thing I want to point out when it comes to workers is, again, African Americans were recruited from the American South, where cotton was a cash crop, and they were recruited into Arizona. There's a particular strand of cotton. It's known as Pima cotton that grows very well in the desert. And when American industrialists began to grow cotton in Arizona, they needed people who knew how to grow cotton, how to work with cotton, and they recruited African American workers into Arizona. And so the picture I'm trying to paint for you is that because of this diversified economy that went from cattle ranching to mining to growing produce, they needed workers with skills and knowledge. And because of that, people from all over the United States, but also all over the globe, were recruited into Arizona. So very quickly, Arizona was a pretty cosmopolitan place of lots of different languages and lots of different cultures as well. So let's talk a little bit about the modern population concentrations. And I have here a map, and I apologize, these images might be a little confusing, but the map, as you can kind of see, circles where most people in modern Arizona live. And they live pretty much in three different areas. To the north, or just to the top of my screen, you'll see some mountains with the kind of the red clouds. This is known as Flagstaff. And hopefully you can tell by the picture of the scenery, this is mountain country. This is where you'll find pine trees, and this is where it snows on a regular basis. This is the northern part of Arizona. To the right is a picture of the Phoenix metropolitan area where I live, and you can see that the landscape is not as green, it's not as lush as it is in northern Arizona. This is more of the Sonoran Desert. And to the bottom left, that's a picture of Tucson. And Tucson is the oldest established European city in Arizona and was founded by Spanish colonists. And I'm trying to remember the date when it was founded, but it's pretty old, at least as the United States goes. And there's probably about 500,000 people that live in Tucson. 1.6 million people live in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And up in Flagstaff, I think the numbers are much smaller. There's somewhere perhaps 2 to 3,000, 100,000 people that live in the Flagstaff area. So the largest concentration of people live in the Phoenix metropolitan area, 1.6 million. And then, as I said, you go down south to Tucson and you go up north to Flagstaff. And that's really, those three cities are the demographic concentrations of where most people live in Arizona. There are lots of people that live out in the countryside, clearly, and they're often engaged in agricultural pursuits or cattle ranching or any kind of herding. But again, most people live in these three concentrated areas. I want to mention also that Arizona is home to over 20 American Indian tribal communities. And so we have reservations as well in the Arizona area that go from the southern part of Arizona all the way to the northern part of Arizona and to the east and to the west. And so these colored areas where different tribal communities now live on land that's set aside for them. And you can go visit them. Again, if you ever come out to Arizona, you can certainly go to the reservations, and they will welcome you and will share their produce and their trade and their food products as well. If you ever come to Arizona, I recommend you have to try a Navajo taco. A Navajo taco. You have to try one if you come out to Arizona. Let me share with you now part of the distinctive landscape of Arizona. This is why a lot of tourists come to Arizona. This is one picture of the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon itself is a very, very ancient canyon, carved out partly by the Colorado River, partly by earthquakes that split the earth as well. And this is, as I said, only one picture. It's a very, very large area. I believe it's about 18 miles. And there are lots of different views, but it's stunning scenery. And lots of people come to the Grand Canyon to see this very, very stunning scenery as well. I do want to mention that there are lots of places in Arizona that where water flows. And yes, you'll see some desert scenery, but it's also very, very green. This is an area found on the Havasupai Reservation, and this is to the south of the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is found in the northern part of Arizona. And just to the south of it, this is Havasu Falls, and it's just beautiful. You have to have permission of the tribe to do that, and you have to pay a fee, but you can do it, and you're absolutely welcome to hike down in. It's about an eight-mile hike down into the bottom of the canyon where these waters flow, and it's beautiful, and it's cool, and it's lush, and it's just really an extraordinary environment. Now, if we were to go east of the Grand Canyon, you would find, now this is still in the north, but you would find what is known as the Petrified Forest National Monument. And right in front of you, this image that looks like logs that have been sawn, these are ancient Triassic era trees that fell and became petrified. So they are no longer organic material. It's not wood. This is stone. And it's a very curious process that over millions of years, that sediment gets into the cellular structure of organic matter and replaces that organic matter and actually becomes stone. So these, if you were to go to the Petrified Forest National Monument and you were to touch these logs, they would not feel like wood. Even though you can see the bark, you can see the structure, it's not wood, it is stone. It is absolutely stone. Now, the other part I want to say about this is that it looks like someone came along and saw these logs in half. What actually happened was that at one time there was this long piece of timber that had fallen over, had then calcified, became mineral rather than organic matter. And because of the weight was so heavy, they snapped off. And that's why you have these pieces that look like someone came along with a chainsaw and cut them off. But that's not what happened. It's simply broken pieces of this sedimentary material. It's really quite stunning to see these ancient forests that existed at one time in Arizona. And Arizona, of course, if you go back that far, Arizona was much greener. There was much more water. There were shallow lakes and shallow seas in the Arizona area. And you can still find dinosaur tracks also, which is interesting in this part of Arizona. Let's see what else. Oh, this is also what's known as Meteor Crater, which is it's still in northern Arizona. It's a crater that impacted about 50 to 70,000 years ago. It's a very, very large crater, and you can't quite get a sense of scale, but you see this road that's going down to the bottom of the screen. So it's a two-lane road. To give you an idea, if you think about the size of an automobile, it's a very, very large crater. It made its impact 50 to 70,000 years ago. Am I getting this right, or is it 500 to 700,000? I have to go back and double check my notes, but it's an ancient crater nonetheless, and you can still go and visit it. And you'll find these kinds of craters around in the Arizona area. You'll find extinct volcanoes that you can see also when the land was much more volatile. Now, this is another piece, another aspect, a ruin from the ancient dwellers of Arizona. And this is a ruin. This is a 3-story high adobe structure 3 stories, freestanding as well. This is known as the Casa Grande National Monument, and that shade structure on top is just trying to protect it from the elements and from the sun. There's lots of speculation about this particular structure, what it was used for. I think the dominant theory at this point is that it might have been an observatory. And we do know this, that many Native communities believed it was very important to observe the stars and the movement of the sun and the seasons, which had an impact of their understanding about when to grow things and all kinds of things when your life revolves around the seasons, rain, and all things like that. And so that's one of the theories, is that this structure actually served as an observatory rather than a dwelling structure, as I showed you before. But there are all kinds of ancient ruins that still can be found in Arizona, which is another thing that I find very, very interesting. Is you can travel around and spend your time just looking at these ancient structures that still can be found. Petroglyphs, as I'd mentioned before, and I'd also told you, and the reason why I'm showing this to you as well, is that they served as markers, they served as roadmaps for people who traveled north and south and migrated on a regular basis, sometimes following games, sometimes following the weather patterns. But the dominant feature that you see here on this screen, and it's a little bit right of center, is a figure that looks humanoid and perhaps was, but might have been a ceremonial figure as well. And this was very common for American Indian communities in Arizona and also in parts of the American West, where they would create regalia, masks, using feathers and all kinds of other natural products to invoke the presence of their divine protectors. And so that may be what you're looking at in terms of the dominant figures, that this may have been a ceremonial site, or this may have been a carving of a deity, a demigod, as a way of calling down protection, or as a way of calling down rain, or whatever it was that was necessary for whoever carved on that stone. So you can also find these records as well. It's not just, as I suggested before, not just roadmaps of game and water, but also ceremonial figures. And petroglyphs were used for ceremonial purposes also. This is a picture of Monument Valley. This is way up where the Navajo Nation is to this day. This scenery is used in many, even modern American movies when they want to look at the American West. This is a very striking scenery. You can go there and you can see this. It's known as Monument Valley on the reservation. And again, you're very welcome if you want to travel through there, and you can hire guides, Navajo guides, and you can ride out there on horseback, and they'll walk you all the way through and tell you stories of the different areas. So you're very welcome if you want to come out to Arizona. I do want to mention this, though, because I realize I've been showing you lots of desert mountains. There are also parts of Arizona, as I mentioned before, that are very green, very forested. So you'll see the snow on the mountains, and you'll see the forests of trees and the meadows that exist. There are lots of parts in Arizona, in the northern part, but also parts in the south, that are green and forested like this. And also underground, there are caverns that you can travel to, and you can explore the caverns, guided, of course. As you can tell, this has been lit up. But also lots of underground caverns can be found in the Arizona area that you can go and explore with the help of a guide. Here's one of the last images that I want to share with you in terms of the scenery. This is an area that's known, it's in the middle of the state. It's known as Sedona, Arizona. There are lots of people who come to look at these particular rock formations. The colors are striking, and I would suggest that this image doesn't do it justice. The reds are fantastic reds. The greens are fantastic greens, and particularly around sunset. This is just a striking area. And there are a lot of people, believe it or not, who find a lot of spiritual energy in the Sedona area also. You can purchase maps of what is known as vortexes. They're kind of these energy concentrations that people like to go to and meditate. So it's a place in Arizona that still holds a lot of significance for people from all over that come to Sedona in particular, and not only enjoy the scenery, but also just the beauty and the spiritual renewal that they find in that particular area. Last thing I want to share with you is, again, I've been talking about the desert parts of Arizona, and especially the Sonoran Desert. In the springtime, this is another thing that draws a lot of people. In the springtime, um, the flowers bloom, and with great beauty that you see here. I'll get to this comment in just a moment. I think this was Tess. I was just saying. I think, Tess, were you just giving me a heads up? Um, yeah. Okay. So hang on. Okay. Just a few notes. So what's the history of the name of Arizona? That's a great question. Um, there are different theories. I think the most compelling theory is that it comes from a Watim term. Now, the Watim people were some of the native communities, tribal communities that you can find here in Arizona, the Akimel Watim, the Tano Watim as well. And they lived in the central areas of Arizona, which is now metropolitan Phoenix. They lived along the waterways. They were people who grew crops and they fished. And one of the terms called Alitsonak from the Watim language refers to Oak Creek. Oak being a particular kind of forested tree, and of course a creek. And so to me, that's the most compelling origin of the name Arizona, is it probably comes from a Watim term, a native term, Alitsonak. But again, there are other theories about where this name came from. I find those other theories a little bit less compelling. Let me see what other what other questions? Okay, so here's another question. It's what are the best movies about Arizona, in my opinion? There is a movie that Nicolas Cage starred in many years ago when he was very young. Nicolas Cage is an actor, is probably my age by now. It's called Raising Arizona. And it's set in a kind of modern Arizona context. But the producers of the movie, they picked a lot of crazy things about Arizona, funny things about Arizona, and built it into the movie. And it's just one that's enjoyable. Otherwise, I would say this, that lots of Westerns are set within Arizona. I like the movie The 310 to Yuma. And the movie that I like in particular is the remake with Russell Crowe and Christian Bale. There was an older movie that was set in the 1950s or made in the 1950s with John Wayne. But I like the remake better, 310 to Yuma. It's referring to a train that takes a prisoner to the Yuma Territorial Prison. I should have put a picture up there for you. You can, to this day, go visit the old Yuma Territorial Prison, where some really nasty people were incarcerated. Great question. Number three, where would you recommend visiting Arizona first? Everyone has to see the Grand Canyon. You've got to see it once in your life, the Grand Canyon. In fact, I'll tell you this, that one of the, I think it's the Wallapai tribe, built a walkway, a glass walkway that's in the shape of a horseshoe. So it's this U walkway where you can walk all the way out into a part of the Grand Canyon on a glass structure and look down. You have to pay money for it, of course. But if you like that kind of thing, you've got to do that when you go to the Grand Canyon. So that would be one of my recommendations. If what do you need to visit first? I would start from the north and then work on south. But there are many areas, as I was sharing with you, that are just spectacular. Petrified National Forest. Again, it just blows my mind how organic matter can be turned into mineral products as well. But lots of areas north and south in Arizona that are just fun to watch or fun to visit. And I'll show you, I've got a few more slides to share with you about what you can visit to this day. Great question as well. Now, what do people in Arizona do with the summer heat? So just to give you some idea. As I mentioned before, in the mountain country, and you see the mountains in the background of this particular picture, the mountain country, because you go higher in elevation, the air becomes cooler and it's much nicer. So what a lot of people do is they often go north in Arizona. They go up to Flagstaff and the mountain country where the Mogollon Rim is at the base of the Colorado Plateau, and they stay there. Many Arizonans, particularly those that live in the Phoenix area in the Sonoran Desert, they have cabins that they go up to in the summertime just to get out of the heat. That's one way of doing it. For the rest of us who have to stay in Arizona, there are a couple things that you do to stay cool. First of all, you have to respect the heat. You have to respect the sun. If you're not careful, heat and sunlight overexposure can kill you. So you have to be very careful. And the reason why I'm suggesting this is that when you live in Arizona in the summertime, you have to be aware of when are the hot periods of the day. It's usually from 10 a.m. to about 3 p.m. That's not when you want to be outside jogging or hiking. If you want to jog or hike, you go early in the morning or late at night, but not in that time period. If for whatever reason you have to go out, take lots of water. Lots of water. Secondly, know where the shade structures are, where the trees are, the walkways are. Stay in the shade. Because the heat in Arizona is a dry heat, it's not a humid heat. When you move into a shaded area, it can be 10 to 15 degrees cooler. So that's why you stay in the shaded areas, bring your water. And this is something very common in Arizona. You'll see people walking around with big jugs, much bigger than this, of water. Right? It's something to keep yourself protected. And the last thing I would say is that because of modern technology, we get to enjoy air conditioning. So our cars are air conditioned, our homes are air conditioned, our movie theaters, our stores, our churches, it's all air conditioned. And so the amount of time that you're actually outdoors is pretty limited. So it's a great question though. Like, what do you do with the Arizona heat? You learn to live with it. And I would say it's like, many parts in Russia, which experience a lot of cold. You learn to live in the cold. You learn to adapt. You learn what to do, what not to do. And it's the same thing with the heat, but in reverse, if you understand what I'm saying, right? So you just learn to accommodate and adapt to the environment. And then you get to enjoy it. Let me see if there are any. Okay, let me continue on with, I have a few more slides I want to share with you. The wildlife. So the wildlife, this is a picture of the famous Arizona road runner. It's a very interesting bird that runs along roads. That's why it's called the road runner. This is another bird, and you'll see a picture here of cactus. Cacti, this is the plural of cactus, are all over Arizona, even up in the colder areas. Cacti, you can find cacti in Spain, right? So it's not unique to Arizona. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about, but you see the needles there of the cacti. And of course, if you're ever out hiking, you know to be looking out for cacti all the time, right? But there are particular birds like the cactus wren that have adapted to living in and with cacti. They make their home in cacti. In particular, the saguaro cactus, that long cigar-like cactus it's Arizona's famous for. These birds burrow into the soft, pulpy structure of the cactus that you see on the side of the beak there. They burrow into that and they make little homes in there. That's how they stay cool. Here's another one I'll share with you. This is a gamble quail. You'll find them all over. I love them. They have a beautiful little twirl when they call. I wish I could imitate it. But these are birds. They can fly, but they're largely runners. They're ground birds. And they live in family units. There's the male and female and all these little babies that they herd around, and they have, I don't think they're called litters, but they have little baby chicks a couple times a year, 2 or 3 times a year. This is a red-tailed hawk. So it's a predator, as you can see, with its claws. You can see them everywhere in Arizona. This is also another one. This is called a turkey buzzard or a vulture. And these are birds that scavenge off of carrion. So in other words, any animal that might have died in the desert and is now just putrefying, these birds love it. And they're part of what keep the desert clean. But if you've ever seen a picture of the American West, particularly in movies, and you'll see a skeleton of cattle or some vertebrate, some creature, and you'll see this bleached skeleton. The skeleton is picked clean. It's largely because of birds like this that will come and they will eat the meat, and then this is how they keep the desert clean. And you'll also notice the turkey buzzard. They'll circle around on warm air currents, and they'll just fly around like this, and this is how they look for their next. Let me just share with you also the wildlife in terms of four-legged creatures. Elk are very common. Deer are very common. in Arizona, both in the north, but also in the central area. Coyotes are very, very common, and coyotes hold a very special place for American Indian communities in their folklore. And certainly for my native ancestors as well, coyotes are very important. And so I love to see coyotes. This is, oh, I'm drawing a blank now. It's a peccary. It's javelina. It's a javelina. It's not a pig. It looks like a pig, but it's a different variety. But javelina are also, they're vegetarians, but you don't want to make them angry because they can't attack. But you can find them out in the wilderness. This beautiful creature is known as a Gila monster. Now, it's not a monster. It's called a monster because of its ugly appearance. It's not a monster in any stretch. They're very slow-moving animals. They do have poisonous saliva, but you have to be playing with one. You have to pick one up. They're slow. Just trust me. They're slow-moving animals, and if they latch on you, they have to then start like grinding on you as well. So you have to be holding your hand there to allow it to grind on you. So the number of people that are actually poisoned by Gila monsters is really quite rare because, as I said, they're slow-moving animals, and you can outwalk them very easily. But you can find them out there. They're unique to this area. Gila monster. They're lizards that grow about an American foot long. And I apologize, I can't translate into centimeters but yeah, they're perhaps a third of a meter. Does that make sense? Yeah, they're now rattlesnakes also. Now these are poisonous. They can strike very quickly, and you can find them out in the desert. Rattlesnakes, because they're called rattlesnakes, they have little rattles at the end of their tails, and when they're afraid, they'll start rattling their tail. And when they coil up like this, is they're ready to strike. So if you're out in the wilderness and you hear them, all you have to do is stand still, locate where the rattler is, and then slowly move back. Their eyesight isn't very good, but they can see motion, and that's how they detect you. But their tongues also come out, and they smell the air of your particles, and that's how they locate you. But you can escape them if you're careful. People who get bitten by rattlesnakes are often not careful of where they're walking, and they don't pay attention to the sound of rattlers. Rattlers don't like people. They get a bad reputation. They don't like the people, and the reason why they rattle their tails are basically saying, "I'm afraid, please go away, please go away." And if you don't go away, that's when they strike. But yeah, they can be poisonous, and if not treated, they can be deadly as well. Scorpions are very, very common in Arizona. And there are all kinds of scorpions. I should have put up a picture of tarantula spiders as well. Yeah, you can find scorpions. You have to go looking for them. They're also creatures that don't like people. They would prefer to eat crickets and other kinds of bugs. And if you get stung by one of these things, that's usually because you're not paying attention or you're trying to play with one. But their sting can be very, very hurtful. It can be like a bee sting when they sting with their stinger on the back like that curled part. Now, let me just talk about cultural features, and this is kind of the end of what I want to share with you about Arizona. I think I'm going on a bit long, and so I apologize. I'll wrap this up very quickly. If you come to Arizona, this is something that's really quite unique, is that people living here in their homes, they utilize desert plants to decorate their homes, right? So this is a very typical yard. That's a palo verde tree. It's Spanish for a green stick. You can see bougainvilleas there. You can see lantana there, Texas sage, Mexican bottle brush, all these kinds of plants that grow in the desert area. It's very, very common to see homes that are landscaped with desert landscape. And people really love this. You can go and see ruins of Spanish colonization. This is a picture of the Tumacacri Chapel that was established in 1695 by Father Kino, Eusebio Kino from Spain. Actually, he was from Austria originally, but nonetheless, he came through Spain. This was a mission that was destroyed by native communities. As I mentioned before, they were highly resistant to Spanish colonization. But the mission is still standing, and you can still go there and see the ruins of this particular mission. This mission was also established by Father Kino. It's south of Tucson. It's called San Javier del Bac. And it was established among the Tanahuatan people. And it is still going to this day. It was built in the early 1700s. It is still a chapel in use to this day. You can visit it. You can go inside. And often on the outside in the plaza, you'll have Tanahuatam, native people selling fry bread and Navajo tacos and all kinds of things, things that they have made as well. You can find ghost towns in Arizona. And ghost towns are often the product of mining communities that sprang up because a vein of gold or silver or copper was found. And right away, people moved into the area, schools were established, businesses were established, and they dug into the ground and they extracted all the mineral wealth. And once that mineral wealth was gone, people moved on. And they often left behind buildings like this. So these are known as ghost towns. And you can go see them in Arizona. They're around. You can go to some of the old mines. This is the Copper Queen mine in Bisbee, Arizona. Bisbee was mentioned in the song that was played at the beginning of this hour. It's no longer an operative mine to my knowledge, but you can go in, you can tour it. You can go all the way down. This one goes deep into the ground. And you can go there and enjoy that. And I believe this is the last thing I want to share with you. And again, I apologize I went long. The Mexican food in Arizona, in my opinion, it's the best. The Sonoran cooking that we have here. These are tacos, grilled meat, grilled vegetables. Oh, that's the best you can find is the Phoenix area. But this is my opinion. And so with that, I think this is the last thing I want to share with you. Thank you for your patience. I apologize for going on a bit long. I get excited about my home state. I really love being here, and I love sharing my love for Arizona. I do have a brief thing I want to say in closing of this broadcast. So thank you all for joining us this evening. And this program, as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, is part of the American Center in Moscow's weekly speaker series, continuing through 2026 on 50 states in Arizona. We invite you to join us next Wednesday, June the 24th at 8 p.m. Moscow time for the next event in the series, which will be on the state of Wyoming. That's another cowboy state. So thank you again. And let me see if there are any questions I need to answer. Oh, yes. Last question. What foods or dishes are most associated with Arizona? In my opinion, I would say Navajo tacos, as I mentioned before. The previous image I shared with, these are Mexican tacos. And so you can see that the bread is this kind of a flat bread, and it's soft as well, so it's bendable. Navajo tacos are made out of fry bread. So the bread is fried up and it's puffy and soft, and it's laid out kind of like an Italian pizza. And so all the ingredients you'll find on a taco, you'll find on a Navajo taco, but they'll have more beans and meat and things of that nature. But it's sitting on fry bread. And so I would suggest that that's probably one of the foods most associated with Arizona, are Navajo tacos. All right. I think that's it for our questions. Again, thank you for your patience and for listening. And I hope you have a good evening.